welcome to the 2025 Open Space Summit, entitled A Deep Dive into How Open Space Happens in Chester County. It's great to see everyone here this evening. We have a great lineup of speakers and topics to present to you. Objectives for the evening are to provide a detailed behind-the-scenes view of land conservation, stewardship, and how properties are selected for preservation, to educate attendees about the complexities of open space preservation and the need for proactive planning, and finally, to provide attendees with information on conservation processes, tools, and the many partnerships involved in open space preservation and stewardship. You can see up on the screen, we have an abbreviated agenda. Tonight's meeting is going to be divided into 3 parts. The first part's the welcome and introductions. Part 2 will feature 4 presentations around the topic of tools and policies for open space preservation. And then we'll move into part 3, which contains 2 case studies. We'd ask that you hold questions until we're going to have a question and answer period at the end of the last presentation in part 2. And then also again, after the second case study when we end part 3 of this evening's meeting. As you probably heard, this is a hybrid meeting. I believe we have 80 or so attendees registered in person. We have probably double that, if not more, who have registered to join us through Zoom tonight. So this meeting is being recorded. If you are joining us virtually, we would ask that you enter any questions that you may have utilizing the chat feature in Zoom. For those of you who are with us here in person, just a couple quick logistics. There's some food and beverages in the back of the room. Restrooms are located outside the door here, almost directly behind me and a little bit to the left in front of the elevators. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that the microphone system in the room is known to be somewhat sensitive. So if you are in the back and maybe having a private conversation or whispering to your neighbor, that may be something that actually gets picked up by the microphone system and could be heard by all the folks on Zoom. So please keep that in mind as well. All right, with that, I am proud to introduce Commissioner Eric Rowe, who's going to say a few words. Thank you, Eric.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm Chester County Commissioner Eric Rowe. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. Open space is part of the Chester County experience. For those of you who moved here from somewhere else, you probably moved here in part because of open space. And for those of you who were born here, you probably stayed here in part because of open space. And that's why I'm raising my family here today. So Chester County has over 31%, 151,000 acres as permanently preserved open space or agricultural land. But 30% of Chester County's lands is still at a crossroads. And so now is the time to reflect on our past collective efforts and leadership and discover how you can help to protect our natural heritage. This deliberate, award-winning program is a prime example of the partnership working together as a county, municipalities, and conservancies to leverage our funds for the good of everybody, whether it's to keep our open spaces green or to keep our farmers farming. We appreciate the efforts of our Parks and Preservation staff and our Planning Commission staff who work together to support our partners with guidance and tools and funds. Preserved green spaces improve your property values. I don't have to tell you that. Our trails, our preserves, our parks, they drive economic activity like tourism and other spending, employment, earnings, and tax revenues, which as a county commissioner is very helpful. Protected open space protects the environment and reduces costs associated with water quality protection and improvement, flood mitigation, wildlife habitat, and the removal of air pollution. Our parks, our preserves, and our trails keep us healthy. So if you're like me, you love open space. I know you do, because if you didn't, you wouldn't be here tonight. So thank you for coming. I hope you learn a lot. I look forward to hearing about the questions that arise, but thank you for being committed to keeping the Chester County experience involved with open space preservation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you again, Commissioner Rowe. We appreciate you being here with us this evening. Next up, it's my pleasure to introduce Ryan Mulhenny. Ryan is a sustainability planner with Chester County Planning Commission, and he's going to be presenting a presentation titled A History of Open Space Preservation in Chester County. So, turn it over to you, Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Commissioner Rowe. So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very pleased to be here as well. Again, my name is Ryan Mulhenny. I'm a sustainability planner with the Chester County Planning Commission. And before we dive into the bulk of our presentation and hear from our speakers and get into the discussions, I just want to provide a brief history of open space in Chester County and what we've achieved over the years, over the last 30 years, and the main factors that have led to this success. So as of the end of 2024, approximately 155,000 acres of land were protected as open space, which is about a third of the county. And that's more land than the cities of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh combined. And the impetus towards achieving this amount of open space began in response to the suburban sprawl of the 1980s and the 90s. And at that time, Chester County was losing about a farm a week to development. And residents and leaders saw their neighboring farms, saw their neighboring woodlands and their view sheds, starting to disappear and called for change. And over time, this response evolved into a proactive, steady, and collaborative effort to balance development and preservation. With about 40% of the county developed and 30% preserved, the focus now turns to how we use the remaining 30% and also how do we steward and maximize the benefits of the open space that we've already protected. So our preservation success is built on 4 factors: strong partnerships, sound planning and policy, steady public support, and a long-term investment. So first, we have a strong network of partners working together in the county. The Planning Commission provides policy direction and resources, while Parks and Preservation guide funding and implementation through their programs, which we'll talk about more tonight. The Land Conservancies partner with landowners and municipalities to identify and protect and steward key properties. We'll talk more about that as well. And the municipalities advance these efforts through their various boards and committees and commissions and their plans and programs. And the landowners make it possible by voluntarily preserving their land. And these partnerships are united by plans and programs and policies that make open space a countywide priority. Landscape 3, which is the county's comprehensive plan, sets the vision to protect and steward open space, while studies like Return on Environment highlight the economic and environmental value of preserved land. The Climate Action Plan discusses the many ways that open space helps mitigate the impacts of climate change, such as sequestering carbon emissions. And municipal planning aligns local goals with these regional vision through their comprehensive plans, their zoning ordinances, and their open space programs, which the county's Vision Partnership program can help fund. And the county's Preservation Partnership and Agricultural Land Preservation programs provide funding and guidance to help implement those plans. And this alignment from planning to policy to investment is delivering results. For example, Landscape 3 identifies several priority areas for open space preservation, including expanding viable farmland, connecting our open spaces, and increasing access to parks. And today, about 47% of viable farmland is preserved, 41% of land within conservation corridors is preserved, and 70% of residents live within a half mile of a park. And behind all of this is strong and consistent public support. In 1988, 82% of voters approved the county's first open space bond and followed it up with another bond about 10 years later. And open space has remained a top priority in every landscapes plan over the years. And in the most recent one, in 2018, 43% ranked it as the most important issue amongst other important issues like economy, transportation choices, and housing options. And municipal surveys also consistently rank open space and the environment as top priorities in their comprehensive plans. And the county and the municipalities have backed up their high value of open space by passing funding programs to help fund and pay for preservation. Since 1990, Chester County has invested over $250 million in land preservation. And 33 of our 73 municipalities now have their own voter-approved open space programs. And it is this commitment that has unlocked other sources of public and private funding that leverage the county's open space preservation efforts. So in summary, Chester County's open space success reflects decades of partnership, planning, and public commitment. It is this culture of collaboration and steady investment that has made the county a model for preservation and will continue to guide how we grow and what we protect. So that brings us to part 2 of our program, where we'll hear from experts who work with the tools and programs and policies every day that make open space happen. And the tools and policies that we'll be focusing on are easements and purchases, open space plans, open space referendums and programs, and open space committees. And after the presentations, we're going to have a panel discussion and a Q&A with our presenters. Again, we're asking you to please hold your questions until the end of these presentations. And those attending virtually may enter their questions in the chat. Then after the Q&A, we're going to take a short break, about 10-15-minute break, and then we'll reconvene to look at local examples for part 3, which is the case studies. So our first presentation is titled Defining Preservation, Easements, and Purchases. And it's going to focus on what each preservation means, each preservation method means, and how they're used for different sites. And this will be presented by the County Parks and Preservation team with Dave, Malika Mulaji, and Evan Mark.
All right, thank you, Ryan. All right, the goal of the next presentation is to distinguish between 2 tools that are commonly used in open space preservation in Chester County. That would be fee simple acquisition and conservation easements. Before we get into the details of that, I just wanted to spend a moment talking a little bit about the Parks and Preservation Department. So with me this evening are Monica Malachi and Evan Martin. Evan works in our agricultural program as a steward. Our county Parks and Preservation Department oversees the county's ag land preservation program. Monica is the manager for the Open Lands program, which includes our competitive grant program known as the Preservation Partnership. And then finally, we have a Parks and Trails program. Our department manages over 4,000 acres of county parkland, and we have over 26.5 miles of regional trail. Also with us this evening is Madison Brettenmeyer, who is our new stewardship coordinator working with Monica on the Open Lands program. Collectively, we'll all be here this evening through the end of the program. Be happy to meet you and answer any questions that you may have. Land acquisition and conservation easements are 2 of the primary tools utilized for protecting undeveloped open space lands from intensive development. Protecting open space is often a complex process with many moving parts. Knowing the differences between acquisition and easements and how these tools can be used is a key to successful preservation outcomes. Fee simple acquisition is the purchase of land by a governmental or nonprofit land conservancy to preserve land in an undeveloped state for agricultural, conservation, or recreational purposes. Open space properties owned in fee typically are approved to become tax exempt. The owner is responsible for the long-term maintenance, stewardship, and determining appropriate uses allowed on the property. Some examples that you may be familiar with. I mentioned our county park system. All of our 7 regional county park sites are owned in fee by the county. In addition, throughout the county, we have state-owned lands. So you may be familiar with our state parks, state forests. In addition, the Game Commission owns some game lands. We also have some federally owned land in the county as well, associated with Valley Forge and Hopewell Furnace. In addition to the governmental state and county-owned fee simple properties, many of our municipalities and the boroughs own parkland or preserves. Additionally, many of the land trusts and conservancies in Chester County also own preserve land that is owned in fee that is available for public use. Conservation easements are the legal agreements by which the landowner maintains ownership of, but sells or donates the rights to develop the property in order to conserve natural resources, view sheds, critical habitat, and farmland. The underlying ownership remains with the property owner, but the use of the property by the owner is subject to the terms and rights granted under the easement. The organization to which the land is eased, whether that would be an accredited land trust or governmental entity, is responsible for monitoring deed restriction compliance with the current and future property owners. The 3 main type of easements that relate to open space that we're going to focus on this evening are conservation easements, agricultural preservation easements, and trail easements. Potential sources of funding for both fee simple acquisition and for easements includes the county's Preservation Partnership Program, DCNR's Community Conservation Partnership Program, also known as the C2P2 program. As Ryan mentioned, many municipalities throughout the county now have dedicated open space tax funds that can be used and are available for both fee simple acquisition and the purchase of conservation easements. And then finally, private foundations often can help fund open space purchases. With both tools, landowners can also potentially donate value to achieve a federal tax deduction. All right, I'm going to turn things over to Monica. All right, it's the slug. Sure.
The second type of open space protection tonight is a declaration. Its full title is Declaration of Public Trust, Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. This is a formal dedication of land as open space for public purposes. It's a short document, just several pages in length. It's recorded and it's written as a set of restrictions that exist in perpetuity. It lasts forever. I'll read a line from the declaration that we use at Parks and Preservation. Quote, "The use of the property as defined in this declaration shall be restricted to open space, natural areas, natural resource conservation, agriculture, and public parks, trails, and greenways." So a declaration is a broad understanding of open space uses. Declarations are appropriate for land that is not privately owned, so owned by a government or a conservation organization, and that is intended for public use. At Parks and Preservation, we use declarations to protect land that receives county open space funds. Currently, we have 351 declarations that we monitor and visit and enforce for compliance with the terms of the declaration. The example that we're looking at today is Banffshire Preserve in Franklin Township. It's a 62-acre property that is entirely covered by the declaration. At one time, it was considered for a potential 12-home subdivision, which is the upper image there. But thankfully, due to a fee simple acquisition by Franklin Township with assistance of county open space funds, it was purchased by the township, and the declaration was recorded on the property to act as the formal dedication and protection of open space. So today, it's open to the public as a very lovely nature preserve. Next up, we have conservation easements. These are both different and similar from declarations. A major difference is that conservation easements represent an interest in real property, which declarations do not. This can also be termed as a non-possessory interest in land, and it's held by a qualified organization such as a land trust or a government entity. The dollar value of the property interest is determined by an appraisal, and this ultimately becomes the purchase price of the easement, which is paid to the landowner. Easements, conservation easements are longer, more complex documents than declarations, usually several dozen pages in length. They are also recorded and they're also written to exist in perpetuity. The structure of a conservation easement is written as a series of purposes and restrictions. The purposes are called conservation objectives, and these define the environmental and conservation values that are meant to be protected by the conservation easement. And then the restrictions are called restrictive covenants, and these define the specific use restrictions and limitations that are designed to uphold the conservation objectives. Conservation easements are appropriate for land that is privately owned, and they're held by land trusts and therefore monitored by land trusts and other easement beneficiaries. The holder of the easement has the legal responsibility, as written in the easement, to enforce the terms of the easement. So that's how they're upheld over time. What we're looking at here is an easement on a 24-acre property. It covers the entire property, and the different colored areas you see show different protection areas of the easement. So in the easement, the restrictions are written differently for each different protection area in order to best protect the particular conservation values that are unique to each protection area. So easements can be written with a lot of flexibility and complexity. Along the top side of the property, you can see a red line, and in this easement, it's called an access area. So this easement includes the potential someday for public access. A trail could be built potentially in that access area. So conservation easements can potentially be available to the public as well.
So next we have our agricultural conservation easements. And as you guessed, these are designed for our ag lands. Primarily, our ag conservation easements are designed to preserve productive agricultural lands and their related ag production activities. Farms composed of prime agricultural soils are prioritized for preservation as part of our review process. So as we rank and consider farms for preservation, that soils value is one of the most important factors. The ag program is overseen by our county's Ag Land Preservation Board, and we currently have just over 600 preserved farms or 600 easements on preserved farms throughout the county. The attached example here is an example of one of our preserved farms in West Sadsbury. And some similarities and differences with other conservation easements. Our ag conservation easements are essentially kind of binary. It's either preserved or it's not. So you'll see the red areas are what we call exception areas, areas that we've excluded from the easement, usually around an existing dwelling or some existing buildings. And then the balance of the property highlighted in green there is what is covered by our easement. And essentially, one of the primary things our easement is doing is restricting development on that ag land for anything except for agricultural buildings and buildings, fences, things like that for ag production. Important to note, as Dave kind of addressed the differences between an easement and the fee simple acquisitions, all of the county's agricultural conservation easements are just that, are easements. We haven't purchased farmland in fee. They're easements. The landowners, the farmers retain their private property rights, but they are compensated for the sale of their easement. Sometimes you've heard the term, it muddies it sometimes, but selling your development rights is often a phrase used to describe some of our agricultural easements. And then other important aspect to note is that our agricultural conservation easements don't convey any public access as part of it. Certainly, we do have a lot of farmers in the program that have public interfaces like stores and things like that, but our easements don't grant any public access. They are still privately owned. And then these easements are monitored by myself and one other gentleman for compliance.
And the final type of open space protection that we regularly work with at Parks and Preservation are the trail easements. This trail easements are simply an access and implementation of a public trail through a property. They're similar to conservation easements in the way that they are written, with the specific details of the trail, its implementation, and its use written into the easement. They are recorded and they last in perpetuity as well. The example that we're looking at, the yellow highlighted area, is the trail area. It's a trail that connects into Natural Lands Bryn Coed Preserve. It crosses over land that is under separate conservation easements and some private land. This particular trail easement design included an area for trailhead parking on its southern end, and then it connects up into the preserve and on the northwest side over to Miller Road. So it is interesting, trail easements are interesting because they allow connection between the other types of open space protection. They can be used in conjunction with the other types. And Natural Lands Bryn Coed Preserve is a pretty interesting example because it's using all types of open space protection except for ag easements. There was fee simple acquisition, declarations, conservation easements, and trail easements all working together to protect hundreds of acres of open space and provide access to everyone to go out and enjoy it. Thank you.
All right, so our next topic for tonight is planning for open space. And Rob Daniels, the Assistant Director of Community Service with Brandywine Conservancy, will explain the different types of open space plans and what they entail.
Thanks, Ryan. I've never participated in speed dating, but I imagine this is how it kind of feels. I will quickly go through a couple of examples here. I'm Rob Daniels. I'm with the Brandywine Conservancy. If you don't know much about the Brandywine Conservancy, you have an opportunity to learn about us this evening. Please come and visit either myself or Grant Coster, our director, over at our table at one of the intermission periods. So I'm going to quickly go over two planning processes that we utilize to help municipalities plan for open space in their municipalities. One is a land preservation plan. The other is an open space recreation and environmental resources plan. And I'll try to explain the differences of those as I go through them. So first off, I'm going to talk about the land preservation plan. This is a much sort of simpler plan from a planning process. It's primarily a GIS analysis of looking at natural resource and agricultural priorities, or agricultural and natural resources in a municipality, and prioritizing their preservation. It's generally led by an open space committee or similar. In Honeybrook, they have a land preservation committee, which oversees their land preservation plan. Like I said, it's a fairly simple process, being that it is a GIS approach. Generally takes about 6 months to complete a land preservation plan. It doesn't necessarily, although it can, involve a lot of public input. I mean, obviously those meetings are public, but generally speaking, it's not as in-depth as open space recreation and environmental resource plan. And as such, it can be updated a little bit more frequently. So we're now, I think, onto our 4th or maybe even 5th edition of a land preservation plan for Honeybrook Township, which we've updated every 5 years since they started their land preservation program back in the early aughts. So as I said, this plan is primarily a GIS approach. What we do is we look at both natural resources and agricultural resources in municipalities. Generally speaking, the natural resources we're looking for on each individual parcels, we're seeing if those contain streams, woodlands, wetlands, steep slopes, riparian areas, interior woodland. Just in case you're not familiar, interior woodland is an area of woodland that is buffered by an additional 300 feet of woodland, which are important habitats for certain species because there's less interference from human activity in those areas. We also look at agricultural resources, generally looking at agricultural soils. If the lands are in agricultural use, the size of continuous agricultural soils on that property, as well as proximity to other protected lands. So through the process, we'll end up with 2 maps that look at natural resource priorities and agricultural resource priorities. But we'll also combine those and look at the highest ranking parcels for each of those sets of resources. And those tend to then end up being the priorities for preservation within that particular municipality. And I'll just mention one of the reasons for updating these, frequently is because of some of those criteria, especially on the agricultural resource side. Those are generally structured around the county and state funding for agricultural preservation. And because that proximity to protected lands helps you in that funding source, obviously, as you update them, as you're preserving agricultural land, you're gaining scoring points because you've actually preserved more property. Quickly going into open space, recreation, environmental resources plans, which sometimes actually we've done several of these where we've actually incorporated land preservation, that same tactic within an open space, recreation, environmental resource plan to prioritize open space and agricultural preservation within these plans. But these are far more in-depth. They tend to take 16 to 20 months to complete. They do, they're adopted as part of the process through the Pennsylvania Municipal Planning Code. So there's a requirement for a lot more public input. And we go into a deep dive into a lot of topics associated with open space, recreation, and environmental resources. We have to make sure that these align with both the county's comprehensive plan as well as other local and regional plans that may be in place. We'll do a deep dive and inventory all the existing conditions within a municipality, whether that's natural resources, agricultural resources, as well as park and recreational resources and trails within municipalities. We'll do a deep dive on municipal ordinances and review those for natural resource provisions, trail provisions, and make recommendations on how those ordinances could be enhanced to continue that work. In some cases, as we did with East Marlborough, we will look also cultural resources in the municipality because those are often associated with other open space as well. And then this is an area we generally, with Brandywine Conservancy, will sub-consult out this particular section, but a lot of base mapping and inventory of existing and future park and recreational needs are done, which is governed by some of the sort of guidelines within that industry of making sure that each municipality is providing the resources that they should for their population size and demographics. Within that, they'll also look at infrastructure and programming, recreational program for residents, as well as what's going to be required in the future for capital and investments if they are required to or need to improve recreational opportunities for their residents. We also do a trail network analysis. This is sort of a high level looking at how areas within the municipality can be connected through a trail network, whether that's connecting neighborhoods with schools, with parks, areas of commercial activity, those sorts of things. And we will also look at greenways within the municipalities as well by looking at where we can see natural resources come together and where protecting those can actually provide wildlife habitat and wildlife corridors, along riparian areas, those sorts of things. And then we will also tend to provide some information on the stewardship of those natural resources, as well as opportunities for educational outreach to make this, palatable to the residents in the municipalities. In terms of timing for an open space recreation environmental resources plans, many of these were done in the municipalities back in the early 90s. Many have not yet been updated, so it's a good opportunity to look in your municipalities and see if this is something that you would want to consider to update. Often it's adopted as an addendum to a comprehensive plan, so it would be ideal to complete, see where you are in your comprehensive plan process. If you just completed a comprehensive plan, then it would be ripe to maybe look at updating your open space recreation environmental resources plan. If your comprehensive plan is getting a little old, I would suggest that you update your comprehensive plan first before moving on to this more in-depth look at open space. Let's see. Oh, and before I mention the aforementioned Chester County Vision Partnership Program is a good funding source, as well as DCNR C2 Piece 2s to complete either a land preservation plan or an open space recreation environmental resources plan. And then just to provide you with some additional information, I don't know if these slides are going to be shared with participants after the fact, but there's a couple of QR codes here which take you to municipal toolkits that the Brandywine Conservancy has developed on a variety of topics, including open space preservation. And I've also linked to the Chester County Planning Commissions. They have a planning topic on open space, which also has a lot of good information for folks to take a look at. So with that, I will pass on to the next presenter. Thanks, Ryan.
Okay, thank you, Rob. So our next topic and presentation regarding tools and policies for open space preservation is on funding preservation through open space referendums and programs. And it will provide a behind-the-scenes look at how municipalities establish voter-approved programs that fund the protection and stewardship of open space. And it's divided into two parts. The first part is John Goodall, Senior Outreach and Associate with Brandywine Conservancy and a Director of Laurels Preserve. And then the second part is Kate Rahman, a planner with Natural Lands, and Kyle Rose, Director of Land Protection, also with Natural Lands. John?
Good evening. John Goodall, Senior, something like that. So, whether you're dealing at the national level, whether you're dealing at the state level, whether you're dealing at the county or at the local level, when you're talking about preservation, money makes the world go round. Depending on what you're looking at, there are funding sources out there, but at a municipal level, there's a great tool out there, and it's called the Open Space Referendum. There we go. Generally speaking, what happens is you have a catalyst that happens, that drives your constituents, your township into looking into open space funding sources. It could be the threat of losing a beautiful property. It could be a historically significant piece of ground. It could be a natural area that has just been there forever that identifies the municipality. It could be the agricultural powerhouse of that municipality. And there are tools out there that, for some reason, my PowerPoint has gone awry. Well, we'll deal with it. So there are tools out there that you can use as a municipality. Preservation zoning or agricultural zoning is one of the tools. You can also look at environmental constraints, steep slopes, wetlands, and things of that nature. You can look at transfer development rights, where you're moving development rights out of areas that you'd like to leave open and moving them into areas that are more appropriate for it. There are a myriad of tools out there. And if they're not working because there's too much development moving in and you can't keep up with the growth and you need to have other tools, a great tool out there is to work with a township and push an open space referendum. And I don't know why it's going this way, but we'll go this way. There were some other slides in there, Ryan. So this next slide, this is all of Chester County. It shows all 73 municipalities. In the late 1990s and the early 2000s, the open space referendum at the local level became available. And we started seeing municipalities put it to referendum and seeing success. Pennsylvania-wide, we're looking at about an 85% success rate. Now, by 2005, you can see it's really jumped. All the ones with a red border are ones that the Brandywine Conservancy assisted the municipality in the referendum. And again, it's an education to your constituents. You're just giving them the option. I don't know about anybody else in this room. I really love living in the United States. I hate paying taxes. This is one of the only taxes I know where it goes. Where it goes is to the ground, and it goes to the places that I care about. So to see the kind of success rates you're seeing in Chester County and seeing it emulated throughout the nation really is a powerful thing. This is a locally grown initiative when you see it at this level. Now, remember, for us that have been around here for a little while, 2005, we were seeing a lot of growth. 2008, we had the crash. So between 2005 and 2010, we still had some inertia and we had some more referendums. But then it stalled between 2010 and 2015. Not much happened. But now what we're seeing again is an upswing on it because it's a tool that gives a municipality the ability to sit at the table with landowners and give them another choice to development.
Blank slide.
Blank slide. Okay. So this is what it looks like today. Every bit of color is telling a different story. The light green, those are municipalities that put it to an open space referendum, and they elected to do an earned income tax that was levied to the constituents within the township. The brown or beige are municipalities, again, that passed a referendum, but they put a millage. It's a land tax. And then the blues are bonds. So there's a lot of ways to go about this, to create the funding source, to drive preservation in your township. It's really finding the right tool. This is interesting. So I must have sent you the wrong PowerPoint or something. So one of the things, what I like to say, again, it's home driven. So we're looking at two spectrums. On one side, you'll hear about Craybilly and what they did in Westtown. And there, I would say the initiative was one of complete saturation of information. It was, meeting after meeting, it was the kitchen sink and another kitchen sink to ensure that, everyone was well educated. I've worked with other initiatives where the municipal officials elected to do a couple flyers an evening, and that was enough, and having the municipal officials at the ballot when they walked through. That was it. So again, where these nonprofits and where the county plays with the open space referendum, in my opinion, is that we're here to listen and provide the tools available to give your constituents the best chance of understanding what this referendum is all about, what the taxes will be used for, and how much fiscally the impact is. Yeah, and here's another good point, and I apologize, this isn't the PowerPoint that I should have sent, but technology is what it is. At the end of the day, as was pointed out with the last speakers, these are voluntary measures. So when a landowner is making choices out there, when they're deciding that it's time to move on off the farm or off the land, or off that critical mass, whatever it may be, they're getting a lot of flyers. I'm sure there are some in this room that are getting those flyers from developers. We all live in a house. It's an option that you have. What these open space referendums and what these funds allow a municipality to do is to sit at the table and have constructive discussions with a landowner about options, about selling the development rights, as you were talking about earlier. And a fundamental way to look at this is that if you've got 100 acres, and you could say it's a by right plan for 100 homes on that property. That's what a developer will do. What a land trust working with the township or with the county can do is they can remove those development rights, working with the landowner, working with the land, and working with that entity, and come up with a plan that works for the landowner. So it may be 3 houses, 1 house, 2 houses, 5 houses. It's a negotiation, again, between the landowner and the land trust. Having the funds available make it a viable option because there's not a lot of people out there that can just give away that value. And having these open space referendums at the local level allow you to have that dialogue at the local level and then leverage it with county funds, whether it's the Preservation Partnership Grant Program, which does a great job in the natural areas, whether it's our working lands and the Farmland Preservation Program. They do great opportunities out there. I got 1 minute left. But again, if you don't have the seed money to start, you can't get to the finish. That's what I just said.
You can have 4 more minutes if you need.
Oh, thank you. So one of the points I wanted to talk about, and I hope the slide is in here, is the cost of community service study. And what it does, and I'm just going to keep flying while I'm talking to hopefully see it in here. So I'm just going to leave that alone and just talk to you directly. So the cost of community service study, it's a fantastic study. And what it does is it looks at the fiduciary, the fiscal impact of our land uses, whether it's commercial, industrial, residential, or agriculture. And it does an analysis saying, look, for all the taxes you pay, how much do you ask in services? So if I pay $1 in taxes, how much am I asking for infrastructure, for school uses and things of that nature? And what this study has done, it was created through American Farmland Trust in Penn State. It's been around forever, and it's consistently shown this, is for every $1 a farm pays into taxes, they ask for anywhere between 4 and the highest I've seen is 19 cents in services. So that leaves a surplus of 81 cents. A win for the municipality, for the school district, for everyone. If you convert that 100-acre farm into 100 houses, again, you're looking at, I call it fool's gold because you're seeing a lot of money come in. But for every $1 that residents now pays, it ranges from up in Honeybrook, when we did the study, it was $1.07, and I've seen it as high as $1.35. So again, although you're getting a great influx, you had a 100-acre farm with one family on it paying taxes, to now 100 residences, a huge influx of revenue, but the services they ask for well outweigh it. So for those in this room and on this call, when you're looking at it from just a purely fiscal standpoint, not about the beauty of the tree or the working ground, fiscally it makes sense for a municipality, for a school district, for the county to do preservation because it's a finite investment. It stabilizes our taxes. It's a wonderful way to go. And it also, I don't know about you all, but as you probably can tell, the beard's gotten pretty gray. I don't like change. I moved into the area I am at because I love it there. I want it to stay that way. I understand that ground is important to people. And for many people that I work with, it's the biggest asset they have. So they can't just give it away. So having it where we're all together, again, I really hate paying taxes, but I love this tax. I have it in my municipality. It pains me every year to pay my taxes. But to go out and to know these farms are being preserved, to know those natural areas are being preserved, open space referendums make it happen. Now, let me just fly through this because there it is, cost of community service. And I apologize. These are all the different ways to go back. This is the kitchen sink. Yeah, I'm going to stop at this point because this is another really, really good presentation, but not the one I was doing. I'm going to pass it on to you all now. Let me try to get to the end of it. This is Honeybrook. It's a really good story. Anybody want to hang around? Yeah, no, it's not the presentation, I swear. This is the cost of community service. There's the... I just have to get through it. There we go. So we're on to the next one. There you go, Kyle.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kate Rahman, a planner with Natural Lands. I'm joined by Kyle Rose from Natural Lands. And I just heard John say a couple of times how much he hates taxes. And I'd like you all to bear with me because we're going to talk more about taxes. So we are we are working with municipalities and township staff and to discuss a few different things when we start considering an earned income tax increase or property tax increase. Most of the time we start talking about, do they need a tax alone or do they need a bond? A lot of times municipalities are considering a referenda because they have a signature property they want to protect and they know the price and they know they're going to need a bond. How much of a tax increase, and we're going to talk about how we determine that. And then is it an earned income tax or a property tax or both? So we always begin by considering the neighbors. So this is an example of a municipality. We were working with municipality D on this chart, and it's sorted by the earned income tax. So it is important to consider the neighboring municipalities because you want to understand the regional tax context and you don't want to be higher than your neighbors necessarily. It's also important to remember that the earned income tax for open space only applies to the residents that live within the municipality. It does not apply to commuters who are coming in who might live elsewhere and work in your municipality. So we will ask municipalities to work with their tax consultants to try to estimate the number of commuters who are contributing to the EIT. Another reason to compare to your neighbors is sometimes you might have residents who are paying a higher EIT in the municipality that they work in. So it's important to understand this context. This is the same municipalities still working with municipality D, but this spreadsheet is sorted by the municipal millage rate. That's the property tax. And just a reminder, mills are cents per $1,000 of assessed valuation. We don't always recommend a property tax increase when considering open space funding. However, it can help split the cost between residents and commercial establishments if the township or municipality has a significant commercial tax base. But again, if a property tax is being considered, it's important to look at the neighboring municipalities because you don't necessarily want to push your commercial establishments out. They might say, oh, we'll just move one municipality over for the lower tax rate. So we do our estimates, we work with the township, and we produce a chart like this to discuss with supervisors and the public. We are fairly conservative. We assume a 95% collection rate and round down to make sure our revenue estimates are conservative. We show the proposed rate increase and the proposed total new rate if there already is an earned income tax or property tax. We also show cost per worker. We typically show this as the cost per $100,000 salary. That way it's easy for people to figure out if they would owe more or less than that. And then we use the county parcel data to determine the average assessed values for both residential and commercial properties. And this is a municipality where it worked out to have that property tax increase because you can see here the additional revenue that is just from commercial properties is more than the earned income tax. So your commercial properties are essentially contributing quite a bit to the overall revenue. So this is the kind of thing that might go in front of the supervisors for consideration. We might tweak these amounts slightly, working with the township staff before it goes to the public for consideration. We also work on a spreadsheet like this to make sure that if the township or municipality needs a bond, that they can afford the bond based on the revenue. So we consider the total debt service, and this is usually bond counsel is involved helping determine the best interest rate for the municipality and the term. You can see in the first line, that's a $10 million bond with a 20-year term. The municipality can comfortably afford that. In the second example, a $15 million bond with a 20-year term, you're cutting it a little close. $58,000 is sometimes transaction costs on a transaction. So that might not be possible. And then there's an example, that final example is a $20 million bond with a 25-year term, and the municipality cannot afford that particular option. We have, though, worked with municipalities that get a smaller, lesser amount of a bond and then just come back and get another bond the next time they move forward. That usually has a level of comfort, especially if they're just establishing an open space program. They know they have enough that they have the amount they need for that signature transaction and a little bit more, and then they'll see if other opportunities come up. And they'll be accruing as well on an annual basis, the tax revenue. Okay.
All right, so at this point, you have decided upon what kind of tax that you're going to propose. You've decided upon whether there's going to be a blend and the rate of those taxes. Next step would be designing the ballot question itself. And the good news here is that the basic structure of this is set by law. So in this case, the part that is required is, in the case for a dedicated tax, you would say, you would write, do you favor the imposition of an increase in the type of tax that you're proposing at the rate of the rate that you've chosen to be used by your township for the purpose of, and that blank for the purpose of is where you have to think really critically about what you're going to put in there, because one, that's the first thing any resident's going to see about why you're saying this is a thing that you actually are proposing for the township. It better be something that they can relate to. Otherwise, you're putting just a wedge right there that could start an opposition against the referendum itself before you've even gotten started. And so in that case, say you're in Honeybrook, there's a catalyst, like John said, that started this whole process. That catalyst might be the foundation of this blank right here, whether that's farmland in Honeybrook or forest habitat and clean streams in North Coventry, whatever it is, you'd write something in there that's appropriate for your township. Once the ballot question is finalized, the next step is to pass an ordinance at a public meeting that authorizes the township to put that question on the ballot. And it's very, very, very important that that meeting happens at least 13 Tuesdays before the election, because you have to notify the County Board of Election at least 13 Tuesdays before the election of the ballot language that you are proposing for that referendum. So thinking ahead and not putting that off to the last minute is extremely important if you want this the referendum to stand. Next, I mean, there's a lot of things as you move from having the ordinance and knowing that the question is going to be on the ballot to public education and outreach surrounding the referendum. If you have a cost of community services like John helpfully described, that could be a really helpful tool for communicating why it is that we're proposing an open space referendum. But one of the more straightforward things that you can do is to produce a frequently asked questions sheet. You'll see here we've listed, a bunch of standard questions that we generally put on every frequently asked question that helps residents answer the basic questions of why you're doing it, what you're going to do it for, how you're going to do it if it passes, that sort of thing. And then there could also be some township related questions that are specific to your township and the context in which you're living. Whether that's people being interested, they just, you have a lot of hunters, you're going to answer the question of what open space means for hunters. Or if you have a bunch of properties in a flood zone and everybody knows it, is this something that you're going to use in order to mitigate that risk, to improve infiltration, or to get people off of those places and transfer that into a park? Whatever it is, there could be questions that you want to answer and get out ahead of so that people understand what you're proposing. Second thing that you can do, and we always do this, is a conservation or an open spaces opportunities map. This is a lot less in depth than what Rob described about prioritization plan. But this helpfully tells a story, a picture's worth 1,000 words. You see this is from Lower Frederick, Chester County. We're showing an example from Lower Frederick and Montgomery County. But this, where the yellow shows currently undeveloped lands, a resident would see this and say, oh, okay, there's a lot out there that we could do if we had funding for our township. But in other cases where you have a really developed township, this map might look different. And so for a lot of people that are not trained into thinking about land protection, they might see a map in a more developed township and say, oh, there's not that much out there. Why are we doing this? But that's where you have to actually follow through on the frequently asked questions or other educational efforts to help people understand that, oh, this 5% of our land still costs $150 million on the market. It's going to be well over 100 years that we're going to generate this kind of revenue through this open space fund. So obviously there's plenty of work still for this open space committee to do. And we still value open space, and we value it for all these different reasons. Getting back to the timeline, I mentioned the 13 Tuesday. I'm saying it again because it's so important. Secondly, running newspaper notices 2 and 3 weeks prior to the referendum. And then there's some best practices like holding a public information meeting to give people an opportunity to ask questions. Posting referendum information on the township website immediately following passing of the ordinance. And actually, I put this under best practices, but I think there's multiple people in this room that would call this a foundational step for any referendum, is to have people at the polling stations the day of the election, whether that's township employees giving information, pure information, or if you have a Vote Yes PAC, being there advocating for people as they go in the door, say, this is why you should do it. Have the opportunities map, all of that stuff to try to get people in the door. Because the people that come to the public meetings are often the people that have their minds made up, the people that walk in the door for their polling the day of, or the people that you want to not hit, please don't do that, talk to as they are going in there to make their voices heard. And like John said, part of the process is about giving people a voice. That's one of the great things. But we want people to have the best information they can, because we actually obviously believe in this. Once the referendum is passed successfully, The township needs to pass an ordinance to update the earned income tax, the property tax, whichever or both that you have updated, and if necessary, an enabling ordinance for debt. The open space committee needs to be formed and educated about how to run, what their role is, how do they do their work, how do they intersect with the different opportunities that are out there, formalize the conservation priorities and the criteria that we use for selecting properties. And I know that Carl will probably talk more about this kind of stuff in the next presentation. And then also perform landowner outreach, because you need to have a pipeline of projects for that open space committee to work on. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate and Carl. And next we have, Kyle, I'm sorry. Next we have Carl Russick, Conservation Director with French and Pickering Creeks Conservation Trust. And Carl will discuss the function, key attributes, and the best practices of municipal open space committees to keep preservation and stewardship going after plans and referenda are passed.
Thanks, Ryan. Hi, everybody. As Ryan mentioned, I'm Carl Russick from French and Pickering. And, talking about governance and committees isn't necessarily the sexiest part. I don't have a lot of cool maps and stuff to show you, but this is really where the rubber meets the road. If you look at townships who are very effective at doing open space and those that are less effective, a lot of it comes down to how they constitute and how they run their open space committees. How many of you folks in the room are part of an open space committee? And raise your hand if you're online as well. Okay, so this is really the nuts and bolts of what makes the process work. Delay there? Oh, okay, there we go. So what are the basic functions? What are you expected to do if you're on an open space committee? There's the planning and strategy part, obviously. You are charged with translating what's in your comp plan, what's in your open space plan into action. So how do you turn that into an action plan? And you need to do it obviously with public support and buy-in from your board of supervisors, because they're ultimately the decision makers. They're the ones voting to write the checks or approve the projects. That involves identification and recommendations. You're looking for, it's obviously part of the planning process to identify land that's suitable for preservation in any of those aspects. But, open space preservation is a combination of long-term thinking and planning and nimble opportunism, right? Because, there was a reference to a willing landowner. That might be, a property that's identified as suitable for preservation. There will be a point in the life of the owners where that conversation is ripe to happen, and a point where it's not ripe to happen. And you need to know enough about these folks, their interests, and it could even be their family dynamics, because a lot of this is estate related, to know when the appropriate time is to have that conversation. Public engagement obviously is very important. Not only do you need folks who are paying these taxes to be comfortable with where their taxes are going, but you want people who might be, see their property on one of these maps is highlighted. What does it mean that they're highlighted? Is it, are they coming to take my property? These are conversations that we've had with folks who don't really understand the process. You can't assume that everyone is completely up to speed. People have very busy lives, and what happens in municipal government is often an afterthought for them. And obviously the implementation, doing the actual projects. What does that mean? How does the process work in your municipality? Something you need to be very aware of if you're on an open space committee. What makes them effective? One, diverse expertise. You don't necessarily want an open space committee comprised entirely of land use attorneys. Having one handy would be great, but you want people who know the community, and people with a variety of expertise. You might have someone who's newer to the area but has a good technical background, but you also want someone there on that committee who knows a few generations back who owned what farm and whose cousin, and who can you reach out to make contact with some of these folks. That's a little better than cold calling, right? So that diversity is important. And another, important aspect of the committee is, what's the makeup of who's on that committee? I'll use North Coventry as an example. I think it works very well because, everyone on that committee is a representative from another committee. You've got a member of the Board of Supervisors on the Open Space Committee. You've got someone from Planning, someone from Parks and Rec, someone from the Historical Commission. So these are all folks who know what's happening in their various silos and can bring it together and help inform those open space prioritization conversations. Clear expectations. It's a very similar conversation to, what happens when you're talking about EACs, right? You can have the most dynamic, engaged, energetic open space committee in the world. If you're not on the same level, playing the same song as your Board of Supervisors, you're not going to get much done. So you don't want to be in a position of constantly surprising your supervisors. You also don't want to be in a position of your supervisors not really even knowing who's on the Open Space Committee. So having that constant communication is critical, and having people, obviously, it's typical group dynamics. Not everyone's going to have all the energy all the time or all the skill set, but you want to share the load and have people on the committee who've got doing what they're good at, so they can follow their energy. And the final piece, it's not the last time you hear it, transparency. Public communication is critical because, one, there's public money involved. Two, there's real estate involved. So you need to be taking constant input, encouraging the public to come to your meetings, and having regular communication. It's better when you're involved in doing the communication. It can seem like you're over communicating, right? Well, we just put that out a few months ago. We sent an email out about that, last year. People aren't registering that. People need to hear things multiple times. People need to be, there's a line there, obviously, where you don't want to be spamming people, but don't hesitate to think you're over communicating a little bit, especially when you're interacting with the public, as far as, where their open space tax dollars are going or could go or should go. And here's the kind of the on the ground practical stuff. If you're going to be on an open space committee, do your homework. Know what's in your comp plan. Know what's in your open space plan. Understand your zoning. Yes, something might be a big parcel, but if it's zoned for, if it's R1 zoning and you got 1 acre lots, you might not be able to afford to preserve all of it. Alternatively, you could have a property that the zoning is more restrictive. And so there may not be as much money involved for a landowner, so they might not be as interested in the conversation because it's not as lucrative as they might have thought. So knowing kind of the nuts and bolts of your subdivision and land development ordinance, you don't need to be an expert necessarily. Knowing your zoning and knowing your comp plans, very important. Also, have constant communication on an appropriate open meetings, sunshine law appropriate level with your Board of Supervisors about what their appetites and concerns are as well. You don't want to surprise them. They want to know what's coming. Second key point, you're not alone in this. Every person from the county in this room, every person from the land trust in this room wants to help you be better at doing open space on a municipal level. So, absolutely lean on us. Reach out, hit us up for advice, hit us up for resource. It's what we're here to do. Don't be bashful. That can get you trained up. Everybody should have at least a basic level of conversancy, as opposed to conservancy, with all the various methods, funding, how long these projects take, et cetera, et cetera. And we can help with that. I've sit in a lot of open space meetings in a lot of different townships, and they're all very, very surprisingly different as far as the dynamic and as far as how effective they are. Another key point, be very extra aware of your hygiene, if you will, around confidentiality and open meetings requirements. Particularly because you're dealing with real estate. You're dealing with folks' estate planning. You want to make sure that if someone comes in and talks to you and it's something that you don't necessarily, it's not appropriate at that point in the conversation to have that be part of the public record. It may be appropriate to do that in an executive session, for example. Townships have gotten themselves into trouble being a little less than careful sometimes in what goes into meeting minutes, and it has complicated projects. So, and if you don't know what your requirements are, that is a great opportunity for you to get to know your township solicitor, who will be happy to remind you as to, what will keep you from getting sued or having to explain to a judge why you were talking about a certain matter in an open public meeting. And that targeted word is key there as well. Folks see these maps, they see, you put a map up in a public meeting and someone sees their property on there. If they don't understand how this process works, they're going to come storming up and say, what's going on? Is this eminent domain? Are you taking my property? We've had people, even after a conservation easement was closed, we've had people talking about, I heard talk to their neighbors, I heard the township took your land or something like that. So it's, don't assume a level of sophistication in your general public on some of the stuff that may not be there. And don't assume that everyone's excited about the idea of being identified as suitable for preservation, because they may not know exactly what that means. So something to remember. And the final point, and it's a key one when you really get into the process, have some simple, clear, consistent ground rules on how you're going to go about the process. Every project doesn't need to be recreating the wheel, because if you do it that way, you're not going to have a lot of wheels. Know upfront who's expected to pay for what. That first $10,000, $15,000 to get a project started is often the hardest part of the funding to come by. Knowing is the township prepared to pay for appraisals? Do they want to pay for half of it? Who's going to pay for a survey? Who's going to pay for the land trust fees, et cetera, et cetera. You don't necessarily have to be the most generous township. We've got townships who pay for everything, all the transaction costs. We've got townships who are a little more reserved in what they're prepared to pay for. But the important part is consistency. So going in, like if we as a land trust are talking to a property owner saying, okay, well, let's talk to the township. Thanks for reaching out to us. We're now going to have a conversation with the township. Being able to let them know how it's likely to progress is very important, as opposed to, well, we can talk to them about maybe they'll do this or maybe they'll do that. There's always going to be some element of that, but having that consistency, even if you're not, promising the moon, very important. And see things from the property owner's perspective. If you're on you're an open space committee, you've got your monthly meeting, you go in every month, you pick up the conversation where it left off. A month has passed. To you, it's like time stood still from the open space committee standpoint. If you're a property owner, you're waiting to hear back if something is a go or not. That's a very long 30 days. And there may be very good reasons why it's taking a long time for the township to deliberate on something back and forth between various, between the open space committee and the supervisors and the solicitor and whatnot. There's a lot of ways, a lot of reasons it can take a long time. But if the property owner is not hearing anything, or if, especially if you're in an unpredictable situation where you have to negotiate the terms of every single project from go, and you're visiting it every 30 days, that's more than 13 Tuesdays before before you've got a property owner. They can give up. They can get frustrated. That's another reason, another way you can lean on the land trust to to do all the hand holding in between, set up things for the next meeting, lay some of the groundwork and then do the takeaway from that meeting and then keep the ball rolling. That's a big part of what we do, is kind of guiding folks through that municipal process so they understand what's going to happen. So with that, that's it for me. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you, Carl. So now we're going to provide everyone the opportunity to ask our speakers questions and talk about what we just heard. So mind us, we got to do a little bit of adjustment up here and we'll be right back. And I'm also going to ask the speakers to come back up.
And then.
Lock these together. I was just thinking. The camera. Sorry about that.
All right, so while we're getting situated, so we're going to alternate questions between in the room and online to the chat. So people that are attending virtually, you can put your questions into the chat. In the room, we're going to be passing around the mic. So Rich right here has the mic. Anybody have any questions?
I do.
Rich, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Dick Whiteford. I have two questions. Number one, is there a publication with all this really great information in it that you people could get to study and understand these processes and so forth? That's question number one. Question number two is, many years ago, I initiated the preservation of some land in western Chester County. Once it got beyond my capabilities, I was fortunate enough to have Natural Lands come in and help out, and that turned into the Salisbury Preserve. And a while back, I heard that PennDOT was coming in and declaring eminent domain on that property to be able to put a roundabout in the intersection of Route 10 and Route 30. And that alarmed me quite a bit, because I think if somebody gets away with taking away land that was preserved into perpetuity, that'll set a precedence for that to happen again and again and again. And I wonder, I've lost touch with that project. I don't know if that's going through or not, but I would like to hear what your panel has to say about that.
I'd like to go first. I can say regarding your first questions about like resources. So at ChesterPlanning.org, you have a plethora of resources and e-tools. I'm not sure exactly what you're looking for, but you have like pretty much everything.
It's a lot of information.
It's a lot of information to take. And then, a lot of everyone's organizations here have their own resources and tools that they share.
I can speak about Salisbury Woods.
Been a Coonvade, Dick. So in Salisbury Woods, yes, the PennDOT has been looking at taking a few acres along the border of Salisbury for expanding the roundabout. There's been strong public opposition to that. And it remains to be seen whether, I don't think it's going to happen at this point, but PennDOT does and has taken a little bit of land from many different preserved properties at one time or another for expanding it right of way. But again, even if they do take some land, it's a very small percentage, a couple acres of the several 300 and anyway, I forget the exact size, but it's a good size preserve.
May I add something there? My concern is that particular property had a very rich interior forest area. And the more you chop off the ends, the smaller that interior gets. And so I think that would affect the.
It was heartening. We've attended a number of the public meetings, and it's been heartening to see the intense opposition from the locals.
I can't speak specifically to PennDOT or the Salisbury Woods Preserve, but I can speak to the fact that the county is aware some of our ag preservation easements along the turnpike have been impacted by eminent domain. So under that circumstance, it does happen for highway widening and things like that. Again, that's specific to the turnpike, but we never want to see land that is preserved in perpetuity be used for purposes other than preservation. Unfortunately, it sometimes does happen in the county.
Does anyone else on our panel have anything they'd like to add? Okay, before moving on to another question in the room, I know we have a lot of questions. We're going to switch to Rachel. Do we have any questions in the chat?
Yeah, there was a question. Someone's hoping that I think, John, you could kind of go over again the cost of community services analysis and sort of like what a $1 tax revenue, what a positive dollar amount getting on the cost of community services analysis would mean versus a negative amount, and what types of land use generally create a positive amount on the analysis versus a negative.
Sure. So just to reiterate, thank you. So just to reiterate the cost of community service study, it looks at the 4 primary land uses. So we have agriculture, residential, commercial, and industrial. And what they do is they look at the tax dollars that are generated through each of those uses. So you look at all the revenue that's been collected for each of those sources. And then for each of those sources, you look at what they demand in services. So primarily in the residential side, it would be the school district, but you're also looking at infrastructure, you're looking at utilities, you're looking at everything that you can draw down to as to what they are asking in services. And at the end of the day, what it shows consistently across the board, and we've done, gosh, Rob, at least 10 of these, I would say. And in some municipalities, I'd say Elk Township, we did it twice as part of their open space update. It consistently shows again that the agriculture, the commercial, and the industrial all have, for every dollar they pay, they ask for a low amount in services. And it ranges between 2 to 15 cents. So again, it creates a surplus of revenue or tax dollars. And that would be at 15 cents of need, there's an 85-cent per dollar surplus. When you look at residential, however, it's a deficit. So for every dollar they pay in taxes, they being all of us, because we're all living in a house, if it's a residence converted over, you're looking at a deficit of anywhere for every dollar they pay from on the Honeybrook one, which was on one of the slides, it showed $1.07 in services demanded. So again, showing a deficit for every dollar paid, a 7-cent deficit. It's a really good study, and it consistently shows for the land uses out there that residential development, it comes in at a deficit. So either we have to raise our taxes on the residential uses, or better yet, preservation. Does that explain?
Yes.
And the gentleman in the green.
Thanks. For ag land preservation, you spoke about prioritizing productive agriculture. And I'm curious about what the current state is of defining productive. You might have a particular farm that maybe had been a dairy farm and older owners, and they gave up the dairy business, but they still have the land. It may not be at that time productive. Likewise, a horse farm is often not considered productive agriculture because people don't eat horses. But if you put Black Angus on exactly the same piece of land, it would be productive. So how do you make those determinations?
Yeah, that's a
That's a,
I don't think it's all.
Really speaking to it.
okay. Well, I don't know. Yeah, there it sounds like. That's a great question. Fortunately, I guess you could say the Pennsylvania at the state level, and then further with our county guidelines related to the ag easement program, agricultural production is defined very broadly. So it's less about considering one of those production activities more valuable than the other, but as long as it is an agricultural production defined activity, it would meet the baseline requirements. So in some of the situations you offered, if the farmer sells the dairy and converts to like a Black Angus type beef operation, that would be agricultural production all the same. Likewise, in the state of Pennsylvania and in Chester County, the equine industry, horse boarding, training, those types of things are also considered agricultural production. So for the purposes of our ranking program and how we consider farms that are applied to us, those distinctions don't necessarily matter. What we're looking for is that it is an activity within the very broad definitions of ag production.
Because it is ultimately the land that you are protecting.
Correct. And that's a great point as well. The activity as it is occurring today or when we preserve it may not be what they're doing in 50 years, but the land itself is available to do so. Especially given where we're at, there's a lot of farms undergoing current transitions, and our ag preservation doesn't lock them into being a dairy farm and equine operation forever, but it does preserve the land that for a future generation or a future landowner could change that ag production into a different type or a different market.
How is the demand for agricultural land protection form, one or the other, whether it's easement or another form, related to the supply? Is there tremendous demand and only a few easements a year can be put out, or is it relatively well balanced? Is there a clear trend?
I would say, I mean, others here have a longer history with the program than I do. That likely from the beginning 1990s, there's probably overall less farms applying right now, but we are consistently ranking 50 to 75 farms who apply to our program every year. And almost every year we're in the 20 to 30 farms we're preserving. So we consistently still have a backlog of farms that would like to be preserved that we're not getting to.
Thanks.
We're going to switch to a question on the chat, and then we have time for 1 or 2 questions, more questions in the room. Hey, Rachel.
Can you talk about the difference between a conservation easement and transfer of development rights?
So a conservation easement is held by a third party, like the county, the state, the feds, or these nonprofit land trusts in front of us. Transfer of development program is a municipal driven zoning ordinance that have sending areas and receiving areas. And at the end of it, if you have sold all your developments off your sending area property, there is some form of declaration or covenant placed on the property that the municipality would be in charge of managing, or they would allocate it to a third party to do so.
Thank you.
Planners, did I get that good?
And Edie?
Back to the study. Can you give me the name of the study and who wrote it? You said that it's been on for years. So.
American Farmland Trust.
Okay.
And Penn State created the cost of community service study and the methodology behind it. And that's the report that we use to follow it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any more? You're good too. You more here?
I had a question for Ryan with the Chester County Planning Commission, and then a more general question. one of your maps showed conservation clusters and corridors. And I was wondering who was defining that? Was that within the county? Is that related to other like DCNR definitions? And also how and whether the State Wildlife Action Plan priorities are considered at the municipal level when you're looking at wildlife habitat value for land conservation?
I'm actually going to pass that one off if Rachel can, because I wasn't here when the clusters and the corridors were prepared. It's from our Landscapes 3 plan. And the clusters are a grouping of open space properties, and then the corridors are proposed ways to connect the open space.
So they were defined by the county.
Yes, it's within our Landscapes 3 plan, but the criteria behind it, not too sure about that, but if there's someone else in the room that can help address that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I think what you said is right, Brian. The corridors and the clusters are sort of like a land use, like looking at land cover, what's currently on the ground. As well as overlaying some of the state level priorities, like you talked about the wildlife plan, the conservation landscapes that DCNR manages out there. What's preserved. And sort of it is a planning level analysis. So it is sort of like a little bit of a bubble diagram with hazy edges. But it does kind of, like I said, reflect what's on the ground and where some of the most important natural resource areas are, and where there's a lot of activity around land conservation, where there's important wildlife corridors, that sort of thing.
And is that typical in other counties, or is that? Do other counties generally do that, or is that? Does it vary?
I'm not super familiar with what other counties do. Maybe Natural Lands or Brandywine might be more familiar with that, but it's a pretty typical way of doing natural resources planning. So I would assume they have something similar.
Corridors has been part of the county's plans for the last 25 years at least.
Yes. So I think maybe they started in either landscapes or our linking landscapes plan. So there's been a lot of continuity with them, and we've been building on them over time and preserving land in those areas.
Thank you, Rachel. And we have time for one more question, and then we're going to take a short break.
Hi, what's holding back some of the townships like Penn, or I think it was West Marlboro, from implementing the EIT? Is there, what are some of the reasons, and what can you do about it to push them along?
So, this would just be my opinion. West Marlboro leads the county in preservation. They have over 70, I want to say 72%, don't quote me, but something to that level. They were credibly, they're just in the right place at the right time with the King Ranch deal and things like that. So they have a lot of preservation going there. They also use a lot of tools like 20-acre zoning and things of that nature to minimize it. I believe, and again, I look to the planning commission or planners in here. I think it's one of the only municipalities that have less people than they did 100 years ago. So when you look at the census and how you develop your comprehensive plan and what you have to use as far as fair share, they can have 20-acre zoning in a lot of that municipality. So although
Like Penn Township or the other ones, I
got to Penn out. That is
a few other townships.
Yeah, no, I get it. And it's the right time, right place, right tool. So, it doesn't happen for just like preservation. It may not happen with this generation. It may happen to the next generation. It may not happen with the supervisors that are currently in office. It may take another group of supervisors that see the tool and see the worth. It's just not the right time. It's not that they don't know that these tools are available. I mean, we try to educate everyone about it. It's what we do. But again, I would say, and please chime in,
Yeah, I'll just put a plug out there for the municipalities that don't use an EIT, because we have evaluated, and this is one of the reasons we talk to the supervisors and maybe adjust the numbers behind closed doors. You might not have enough of a population to have enough to make it worthwhile to have a tax. That's a very real thing. And so we want to be sure that we don't move forward. Some municipalities and they can accrue a very small amount annually and leverage grant programs, and that works for them. Others might need to do a bond. Some municipalities do open space through their general budget as well. So I don't think we should necessarily consider an EIT a gold standard. It's a tool in the toolbox, and that tool might not be appropriate for the job you're trying to get done.
I can add one thing as well. I was recently talking to a township manager and wanted to get more information about their township, and they don't have an they hadn't passed an open space referendum, and I was curious about what their thoughts were. And I asked him, can you tell me more about your township and where you see it going in the next 10 years? And his response was, well, the main thing we've got is we've got a few landowners that own too much land and they're not developing it. And we need to get that converted into houses so we have a higher tax base. I mentioned, I said, that's not, I've heard different things about that. From what I've heard from certain, studies, I talked about cost of community services. And he just said, well, I just disagree. And so the point being is that some people just don't see things the same way that everybody else sees it. And that's not the case for everyone that doesn't have one. But in some cases, it's just they're not there yet, maybe, or a change in supervisors might change things. But just differences of opinion.
Do you have meetings with supervisors or, as with the county, kind of educate them on some of these things?
Well, in this case, I was just at a breakfast and talked to people. But no, not. You have an answer to that one?
What didn't we just do there? Gun Township, so, the tools are available and the education happens, and I think what everyone is saying is absolutely correct. In that it's a tool, and some townships, as we had shown in the previous slide, have embraced it over time. There are some townships that are still investigating the use of other tools to manage their growth and the vision for the township. It's not to say that, it's for everyone. I love the tool because again, it allows that conversation with lands that you are desirable for preservation. I like to put it to it's like putting a chip in a poker game. It gives you the ability to be at the table, but it's not for everyone.
I'll just also note, and maybe we have more questions. At Natural Lands, we have to be invited in. So we'll talk to any municipality, but they need to invite us, or someone needs to suggest that we be invited in, but we'd be happy to talk to more municipalities.
Can I just say one thing? I'm sorry.
I think, to your point, if supervisors are reluctant or haven't, spent the time to understand the tools, the most important thing is that they're hearing from their citizens. So the electorate, the people who live in that township, if the supervisors understand how essential people believe that open space preservation is, then they have to react to that in some way. They have to respond to that in some way. It's hard to know, you can't predict necessarily how they'll respond, but the communication has to be coming from the citizens to the elected officials at all times, but especially if there's a, kind of a obstacle, you see an obstacle that is preventing them from pursuing open space projects.
Sorry.
Okay, so we are running over time here, so we're going to move on to through the first part of the program and then take a 10-minute break. I want to thank our speakers very much for your time and for the audience for your great questions. Again, we'll take a 10-minute break, and when we come back, we're going to dive even deeper in part 3 and talk about the case studies. Okay, we're going to move on to the next part of our program. Try.
We're going to start the next section.
I was very.
Okay, we're gonna get started here. The people in the back want to move their way back to their seats or. Okay, so in part three, in this section, we're going to look at local examples of open space preservation. So these projects show how the tools and the programs and the policies that we discussed in the first part of our program, how they work in practice, how they work in the real world, and how collaboration between our many partners and residents make open space happen. And to help us with this, first, our case study number one is Craigbilly Farm Preserve in Westtown Township. Todd Samsel, Vice President of Conservation at Natural Lands. And Jack Stefferod, Senior Director of Land Protection, also at Natural Lands, will be guiding us through this.
I suspect, many or most of the people in the room and listening this evening at some point or another heard about Craigbilly Farm, whether it was, the active opposition to the development as it was occurring, or maybe, the conservation after the fact. But Craigbilly Farm is a couple miles south of here. Big, large, open landscape, literal headwaters of Radley Run. Just an enormous, beautiful slice of Chester County. From historic buildings. And this is what Toll had planned. Interestingly, this is the third development that was slated for this property and the third development that didn't pan out. Many landowners erroneously believe that a development is the only way to go if they're going to maximize dollars and get a fair price for their properties. And this is obviously not the case. Can conservation happen every time? No, of course not. There are indeed properties that probably should be developed, as well as properties that shouldn't be developed. Early in 2020, Toll, after several years of active opposition, backed away from the property, gave us the opportunity to stick our foot in the door, so to speak. Craigbilly Farm is part of the Brandywine battlefield. There's neighbors of Craigbilly Farm friends, and hundreds of individuals that attended meetings for years and years in opposition to the development. We were lucky when Toll backed away that we knew one of the advisors, and the family's advisors knew of us and said to the family, you really ought to talk to those conservation guys because sometimes they can make magic happen. So it was early in 2020 and through the winter of 21 that I was meeting with the family. And like all families, one of the first questions is it really possible to do this? And the answer clearly is yes. But, in a project this big and this expensive, there's a bunch of things that have to happen. We're going to need multiple sources of funding, and there's going to have to probably be some conservation easements on some private lands around the buildings and a fee ownership because, public access is important in generating some of the dollars. I remember early on, the family patriarch, said to me, do you believe, Jack, that we can do this? And I said to him, yes, sir. I've long since given up working on projects that I don't believe it's going to happen. And I wouldn't be here if I didn't firmly believe that we can make this happen. Thank God we're in Chester County. The map shows, the parcels that the county has protected. this ain't our first trip to the rodeo either. You know, we had Brent Coed Preserve that we conserved a number of years back as an example. And we have certainly utilized, you know, county, federal, and local dollars to make these things happen. As soon as I had permission from the family to talk to the township, I went and met we went and met with staff and the supervisors who were delighted and immediately on board. They knew that they had an enormous amount of work ahead of them. And when one of the things that was going to happen was passing a referendum, because without passage of a referendum, no one else would have even considered giving them funding, because if local support wasn't there, this would have been dead in its tracks. Once we had to go ahead, then, you know, we knew the family wanted to dispose of the property, and we spent a couple of weeks trying to figure out, you know, what it might look like, you know, what a preserve, what size of a reserve, what size of conservation easements. You know, we debated 3 and 4 and 5 different easements, perhaps. We settled on 4 different conservation easements, which encompassed the buildings on the property. There was brief discussion. There's some commercial zoning along 202. And we thought, well, you know, for a little while, maybe we should consider carving that off and selling it, except that I gave my buddy John a call to talk through this. And John said, "Are you kidding me? You know, how can you say, let's preserve Craigbilly Farm, but only part of it?" And so with that conversation, we're off to the races to conserve the whole thing, because that really is the only thing that really made sense. Then, of course, you need an appraisal, because township can't spend money more than an appraised value says. And a landowner kind of like to know what they're going to get paid. And for an appraisal, it's not just any appraisal. You know, if you go to your realtor to sell your house, they'll give you, you know, an appraisal that's 5 or 8 pages long. We're talking about a 2-inch thick appraisal that looks at every aspect of financing and value for property. And because we envisioned federal funds, we knew that it had to have a federal standard appraisal, not just a state level appraisal. And that appraisal, not only do we need that appraisal, it's got to pass a review from an independent reviewer. Luckily, the appraisal that we had met the expectation of grant funders, the township, and the landowner. So we immediately turned around with a short-term timeline of what needed to happen. Clearly, on the township level, you know, they need to do agreements of sale and get the referendum on the ballot and those kinds of things, where Natural Lands, you know, did the grant applications for both the easement areas and the fee simple purchase by the township. So early in 22, we had, you know, 2 acquisitions going on. One was the conservation easement portion, which Natural Lands was purchasing, and Natural Lands would hold the easements, with the fee purchase by the township. And right from the get-go, we knew that for this to work out, Westtown Township was going to need to pass a referendum of about $7.5 million. We were going to lean heavily on the American Battlefield federal funds, and then obviously state and other locals sources, knowing again that once we knew the public sources, then we'd have to turn to foundations and private individuals. Again, thank God we're not only in Chester County, but southeastern Pennsylvania, where referendums are common enough that people know of them and have used them extensively. So we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. But it is also a political campaign. Brandywine Conservancy did a cost of community services for us that showed, yes, indeed, it does make financial sense to preserve Craigbilly Farm. The township, utilizing Act 153, got the referendum question on the ballot, where people they vote to raise their taxes for this stuff. And in Westtown's case, the tax was earned income and property tax to spread the burden as equally as they could among as many people that were in the township as possible. Westtown's citizens formed a political action committee who did a fantastic job. They were incredibly active. Brochures, mailings, vote yes, yard signs, public presentations, door-to-door outreach. They financed their own campaign, some of which was passing the hat, some of which was T-shirt sales. All the while when the township was working on the ballot questions and getting on the ballot, and they were ultimately successful. So at that point, we had, going through spring of 22, we had the public applications pretty much done. And really, we were beginning to wrap up with the easement fundraising and concentrating on the American Battlefield Program. The 2010 American Battlefield Protection Program study clearly shows Craigbilly Farm as part of the Brandywine Battlefield. And that was borne out by, looking at the studies where Hal coming down New Street out of Westchester, crossed some of Craigbilly Farm to get to the main battle site, which was borne out by Von, however you said that name. Battle report, which clearly talked of, Craigbilly itself didn't exist, but going through the fields to get to the battlefield clearly went through Craigbilly Farm. Unfortunately, the study that was done in the 60s designated, the federal designation did not include Craigbilly. No one from the 2010 study went to Congress to have the lines redrawn. So we weren't eligible for Brandywine Battlefield funding. Luckily, and we just in the nick of time switched from the battlefield program to the regular land and water conservation funds. And so the time and effort that we had put into the battlefield, most of what we had for the application for the battlefield was transferred to regular land and water conservation funds. And we were ultimately successful in that. Going into early in 2023, we had secured funding from a bunch of different sources, knowing that Westtown had passed the referendum, still concentrating on the public funds. Conservation easements funding came through, and so we ended up settling on the easements in June of 23. Turned quickly around, for the easements, like all easements, the highest protected area protected, mostly the sensitive, environmental resources like the riparian corridor. There's lands in each easement available for agricultural activity, and then obviously a house and amenities in a building envelope. Quickly turned our attention to finishing up the fee simple purchase by the township, and turning our attention away from the more public sources to the foundations, with the Open Space Institute, Marshall Reynolds, and Mount Cuba making some significant contributions. And also private donors, both Brandywine and Natural Land had anonymous donors contribute to the program. And we began the mail campaign. We turned over every rock we could. We applied multiple times for some funding sources, and a couple of them we were unsuccessful in garnering. And at the end of the day, we had everything together by December of 24 when we settled on the fee. And these, at the end of the day, the landowners made a donation of value about 1.8 million towards the effort, and then we were done. I have to say that first off, again, thank God we're in Chester County. The land ethic in Chester County is a dream of most of the rest of the United States. And Westtown Township and the committee that helped in the PAC were vitally instrumental in making this happen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jack. So next we have Justin Yike, the Township Manager of West Bradford Township, and John Goodall, Brandywine Conservancy, to talk about their experiences with the preservation of Hogland site on Groundhog College Road in West Bradford Township.
Thank you. When I came in here tonight, I felt like I knew a little bit about land preservation, but I feel like I'm going to be leaving here with a 4-year degree in it because what a fantastic program. Well done, Chester County Planning Commission and all the land groups that participated in it. You did a fine job. I'm here to talk about a property in West Bradford Township on Groundhog College Road. And unlike the name, we don't educate groundhogs in West Bradford. I don't know where the name came from, but this property, when I came to West Bradford 10 years ago, we didn't have a land preservation program. And I always marveled at this property because it was just the classic Chester County farm, the rolling hills, the beautiful view sheds, exceptional value waterways. It had everything. It butted up to township land that we had already preserved, which then again butted up to the Cheslin Preserve. Just a fantastic piece of property. And I'm in the job about 3 months. And this gentleman comes into my office and he says, I want to develop my land. Pulls out his plans and I'm like, it's the farm. But I sprung into action. I thought, I got a plan. I'm going to hit the Powerball tonight and this problem is going to go away. But needless to say, I did not hit the Powerball. He brought this plan in for 42 lots on this beautiful farm and it was like just tearing me up, but he had property rights and we respect that. So he went to the planning commission, he got some feedback, he got some pushback. And he said, I'm going to come back in about 3 months and I'm going to revise this. So 3 months go by, he comes back to my office, pulls out the plan again. He's down to 31 lots. How do you like this? I said, well, you're getting better, but when you're on the bottom, there's only one way to go. I'm back to the planning commission and by this time, word's getting out that the farm's getting developed and the neighbors are getting upset. And that always helps. So his next planning commission meeting wasn't so pleasant. And I think it was around this time, we didn't have the program in place for land preservation yet, but with John Goodall and myself, we thought, let's approach him about a conservation easement on the property. We have money set aside in reserve funds. I think we can make this happen. And certainly got an appraisal done, went back to him and it just wasn't working for him because at the end, it all came down to the dollar. And he went and got a second appraisal. Second appraisal was astronomical. It wasn't even doable for us. So I think somewhere in that time, we started thinking, can we do a conservation plan? Can we talk him into doing 8, 10 lots, doing something to offset the cost to buy down his density or so forth? And to his credit, he was willing to work with us and have his engineer bring this plan back in. Problem was when he brought it back, he now had 13 lots on it, better than 30. But again, we had the issue, there's not enough value in what he was putting together versus what we could give him to make him whole in his mind. So the 30 lot plan was in my opinion at the time, was basically a by right plan. He didn't need zoning relief. He didn't need saldo waivers. He could have probably went back and pushed his way through with that plan. I quick went back to my board of supervisors and I said, look, we're like right here. We can't bridge this gap. I said, just stick with me here. Give me your blessing to buy the farm, the whole thing, the home, the buildings, everything. And they debated for a while and they thought about it and they said, look, if you think you can buy that, if you can preserve it, and you can do all this in a fiscally responsible way, go forth. And I walked out of the meeting that night and I thought, well, this is going to be a short tenure at West Bradford. I'm in for a penny, I'm in for a pound. Next morning, 7 o'clock, I'm in my office. I'm going to call this guy. I call him up, no answer. And that's not like him. 4 hours later, he calls me back. He said, I was sleeping. You know, my wife and I jumped on a plane last night. We came out to our house in Malibu. We're 3 hours behind you. Okay. I said, I think I have a solution that'll solve this problem. I said, sell me your farm, sell it to the township. The appraisal was like $5.8 million, I think. And silence. And all of a sudden he starts yelling and slams the phone down. And I'm like, I don't know what I said to him, right? Whole day goes by, nothing. That night at 9:30, he calls me back and he says, yeah, you know what? I'm sorry I had to hang up on you. He said, I was sitting on my porch, guy pulls in a van, steals the motorcycle out of my driveway. I had to chase him down the street and call the police. And I'm telling you all this because there is such a human element to doing these deals. It's not all technical stuff. There is years of human relationship and friendships and building that you gotta do. When you want to do an easement, you're not going to do it the day the person wants to get rid of the property. You're going to develop that relationship years in advance. And for 4 or 5 years, we did this dance. So anyway, he says, hey, your offer's pretty good. I got to think about it. I'll be back in Pennsylvania in a week. I'll call you. Calls me up. He says, all right. I like it. He said, but I got to be honest with you. He said, I don't want to part with the farmhouse. And I'm thinking, bingo, because I don't want the farmhouse. Bingo, man, hit the jackpot. So I said, well, why don't you talk to your engineer, do a flag lot, take the lane, take the home and the farm and the barns and the pond and the pool and all the nice stuff and keep it. Sell us everything else around you. Grant me 2 access points off your lane to your farm, which is key to another point that John will make in a little bit. And sell us the rest of it. He says, okay. $2.9 million, $27,000 an acre for the raw land. He said, get an agreement of sale. Do the agreement of sale, send it to him. He calls me up a couple days later and he goes, this ain't gonna work. I said, well, why not? He said, well, I don't want your spray fields or your sewer wastewater or any of that in the property next to me. I don't want to look at that when I get up. I said, well, you're not in our service area. I have no intention of doing it. This is an easy giveaway. We'll deed restrict it. Okay. Do the agreement of sale again, send it back to him. He calls back a week later. This ain't gonna work. I said, well, why the hell now? He goes, well, I don't want a pig farm next to me either. And do you remember the woman that fought my development and the one I think was stealing my mail? Yeah. He goes, I want a building lot right in front of her house. I'm not doing this deal unless you put a building lot in front of her house. He said, it's on your dime and it doesn't change the value. You want to put 10 of them there and sell them to us? Go ahead. I don't care. So he did it. Did the agreement of sale, send it out to him. A week later, he calls back, done. So he, did a subdivision, subdivided his home off, took care of the rest of the land that we bought. And, right after that, I went back to the board and I said, the only thing that's going to screw up this preservation project is plopping a house right in the only spot you can see it from the road. So let's do a reverse subdivision. Let's get rid of that lot, put it back with the other farm, and we'll have 2 farms that will ease and we'll sell. So we did that. And with that, my 5-year bromance with him was no more. Because if you ever want to tick somebody off, just do something that makes their perceived enemy smile. That was the end of it. So we got it done. John was actually all through this with me, the entire project, and he was fantastic. But he did some slides, and after I saw the first round of slides, I thought, I'm not touching them with a 10-foot pole. So I'll hang out here if you.
Yeah. So we'll go through it real quick and the numbers and whatnot. So as we can see there, it's an exceptional value watershed, 168 acres. If you just take a 0 off of the Cray-Billy, instead of 20 million, we're looking at 2.9 million. So again, values change in Chester County, but it's still important. And again, without that open space referendum, we couldn't even have started on this project. You can see all the preservation around it. Every bit of color is showing preservation. Deep green are agricultural easements, light green are conservation easements. The blue is parkland by the township. So again, it went in the beginning 3 years, 42, 30, 16, 13, 12 lot subdivision. It went all over the map. It started out with a transition from easement acquisition to fee simple acquisition. again, without having a municipality as sophisticated as West Bradford is and having a township manager who's willing to be good cop, bad cop, crazy cop, and just nurture these projects along while we're sitting in the background, helping, trying to find, outside of the box solutions to it, to take it from purchasing an easement using in part preservation partnership grant funds to an actual acquisition where the township went solely on it and turned that money back to the county because it was an acquisition instead of an easement. You're taking a flyer here, but as we saw, the property is incredibly important, and there are incredibly important properties and projects throughout the county. There's a shot of the 13-lot subdivision. It doesn't sound like a lot, but when you see it on the overlay, it's like even the best was not good enough. Here's what it turned out to. The center portion is where the house is. And that's what the landowner kept. And originally he was going to place a conservation easement on it. But as we described through the negotiations, hot, cold, all sorts of ways, he ended up not placing it on it. But because of the way that zoning is written, it really curtails with that 60 acres that he kept, what he can do with it. It's pretty much landlocked to what it can be. It's a shared driveway with 3 lots. The township zoning restricts it to no more. We skip on to the now. We own the property with the township. We're placing a conservation easement on it. This is the one side, which is the 3 and 4. The front is where the reverse subdivision occurred. And this was 32 acres, as you can see. The second one is the 75-acre parcel. And you can see, again, it has a house site in the back and a tenant house on the front with a 75-acre parcel. We all agreed that should be the best. It has a trail along the left-hand side. We placed this all in a conservation easement on the 2 pieces, and then it was liquidated. It was sold on the open market. And here are the numbers. So purchased for 2.9, sold ease for 2.1. It was a loss of $850,000 or $7,870 per acre, but that also includes the survey fees and whatnot. It also restricts the other 60 acres because of the way the subdivision occurred. So arguably, the township paid about $5,000 an acre for the easement. When you look at the easement value, when we did it originally, remember we went through a lot of iterations with this. If you look at the appraised value at the bottom of the page there for the whole 169 acres, if the landowner went that way, we were going to end up spending $15,500 per acre for the easement. So even if we married it with the county, which was a 50%, if we were lucky, you're still looking at over what we ended up paying for it. It was a risk. All right, when you're doing a speculative buy like that and an easement and then a sale and hoping to get those funds back, you're taking a risk. The township took that risk and it was successful, and they ended up, if you're looking at it from a fiscal standpoint, it was a more fiscally better way to go about it because you ended up spending less than you would have if you did it on a conservation easement or a purchase program. This is another project that we're going to throw in, but we don't have any time, so we're going to stop it with that one. It was a really fun project. And again, when you have a partnership with a township and a land trust that's willing to go outside the box and a landowner that keeps coming back because of those relationships, yelling, screaming, going crazy, and at the end of the day, you see things like this happening. It really shows things like this can happen. So thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes for questions. Invite Jack back up. So any questions in the room for our presenters? Edie?
This is a question. Question for John and Justin. You ended up holding in fee. Is the township own the property in fee now?
No, after we had the After we had the easements put on it, we put it back on the market and we sold it. And it was right around the time of, I think it was right around COVID. So it worked in our favor, I think.
So you don't own any?
We don't own any of it. Nope, it's all privately owned.
There's a question from online that someone's wondering, just sort of generally, when a developer buys a property that the community was really hoping to see preserved, but it's not preserved, what can people do?
So we address this question literally weekly when people call. You drive around Chester County, there's always save, insert name, farm. There's so many special places to save. And, what we tell people is, first of all, we need a willing landowner and we need to know that there's interest from funding sources. So we typically are talking to the township, talking to the county. But if the landowner if the property's already been purchased by a developer or there's already development plans in place, the reality of it is it's often too late. So what we try to educate people on is the importance of being engaged in your township's public meetings, and making sure that your officials are hearing from residents about what they care about in terms of open space and special places, so that you proactively can get in front of the developers wherever possible. And as Jack said earlier, conservation is not always going to win, but hopefully we can save the most important places by engaging with folks and encouraging them to be more active in their municipalities in a proactive way.
I think you slightly undersold the real dynamics of the Craigbilly public meetings. In those public meetings, development lawyers often intimidate everyone. They intimidate supervisors. They intimidate any citizens who happen to show up. They talk about what kind of by right powers they have. They basically lay out the case that you can't stop us.
Right.
Well, in this particular case, the citizens became so quickly mobilized and so intense that it was almost like a lynch mob in those meetings. And basically the supervisors got intimidated by citizens who said, we don't care what you think the law is. We're going to vote you out if you go ahead and approve this plan. That kind of local political activism at the grassroots level is the factor that I think, as much as the creative work that Natural Lands did to put together a good deal, those two were the critical factors. But nothing would have happened had it not been for the local citizen outrage.
Agreed, 100%.
Thank you so much. Just to echo the gentleman's comments, with Save Forsyth Farm, 8.5 acres of land, which is held hostage by a developer who has allowed 23 years of demolition by neglect. And even though it's only 8.5 acres of land, it represents some of the most profound history of the abolition movement, the Underground Railroad, the history of the Westtown School and Westchester University. And we are dealing with a township that has an apathetic view looking at this from a private property ownership issue. This developer is in multiple litigations in other townships and in other counties, and our group is trying to galvanize our efforts. And I got a call today from one of these developers who was pushing his weight around. And he was sort of this shadow developer to Joe Kravitz. And he was basically saying, hey, look, we have deeper pockets than you can ever imagine that Kravitz has. We know he's in bankruptcy. Look, we're going to do 7 homes on this 8.5 acres of land. So the property is about to go into conservatorship. There was a court hearing this Monday. Now the citizens are shut out of this process of the conservatorship. There's wetlands on the property. We believe there's a Native American burial ground on site. And we just need help understanding how we develop an effective plan that gets the township out of this apathetic viewpoint and really galvanizes our efforts. And our outreach is starting, but open space, 237 acres of land, 300 acres at Cray-Billy. This is a small 8.5 acres, but it represents such a profound history. It's related to the free Black community of Shiloh AME Church and Cemetery dating back to 1816. Headstones were removed in the 60s. The church, the remains of the church, bulldozed, used to build a home. And fortunately, thank God to Westtown Township's leadership, they put a historic marker in front of that site. That family, those families of Shiloh are deeply connected to the Forsyths and this profound abolition history in our community. And we're really struggling to move this along, but thank you for your insights.
Good luck, Township.
West Goshen.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So we are at time. Just, does anyone have any more final question for our speakers? And well, I just want to thank you all for being here tonight and for being part of this conversation about how open space happens in the county. We've seen how county programs and municipal planning and the work of our partners, the trustees, or the land trust, and the citizens and our municipal leaders all come together to make it happen, and how essential it is for residents and citizens to stay involved and aware. And we thank you very much for your time.